Morning, friends. Today I am going to discuss about Mathew Arnold's The Study of Poetry, which is prescribed for second year optional students. Before venturing into our understanding of the essay, I wish to give a brief introductory note in considering Arnold as a critic. According to Lionel Trilling, Arnold is virtually the founding father of modern literary criticism in the English speaking world. And Arnold, in his essay, The Function of Literary Criticism at the Present Time, provides an injunction for how a critic should be. See the object as in itself it really is, and also through his celebrated definition of criticism as the disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world, provide enough substance to understand relevance of Mathew Arnold for the scholars, teachers, and students of literature and criticism. It is Arnold who gave literary criticism an important function and institutionalizing in academy. For Arnold, criticism engaged with many artifacts of knowledge like history, education, politics, religion, philosophy, and other. Because we know that literature is vitally connected with society and culture in its making. Many critics honor Arnold for being an ideal of literary and cultural humanism, but at the same time, radical critics and contemporary theorists complicate and undermine him. Having been informed an introduction to Arnold as a critic, now I attempt to venture in our understanding of Arnold's essay, The Study of Poetry. Yes, friends, at the beginning itself, he is going to state that the future of poetry is immense because it is worthy of his high destinies. And he says that our race and time may go on, but poetry is going to stay forever. And there is no accepted fact which we can say that which can't be questioned, dissolved, or shaken, because at one or the other point of time they are going to be hollow. But poetry is going to stay forever, what Arnold says. One of the most important aspect of Arnold's essay is he says that poetry is superior to all forms of knowledge, whether it is religion, philosophy, science, history, politics. For example, if we attempt to see how religion is going to fade before poetry, in our understanding, we know that poetry is the stronger part of religion in its making. Since religion lays its strength on facts which are based upon illusions, or in a sense we can say which are based upon emotions, it fails to withstand the test of time, or with the evolution of science, it fails to withstand. Our study of English poetry is like a stream of river, or a contributory to the formation of the mighty river of world poetry, he says. So therefore, in our judgment, our thoughts must be ground by with higher destinies and higher uses. They must not be with the approach of a general man. Because in our understanding of poetry, we must have some standards in it. More and more, man looks towards poetry, more and more it discovers. Such is the strength of poetry. And he says that it is because poetry is going to interpret life to us, and also it is going to console us, to sustain us, since it's the mirror of life in its making. Comparing poetry with science, Arnold happens to say that Without poetry, science is incomplete. So, in his attempt to substantiate this idea, he places before us definition of Wordsworth's poetry, where Wordsworth says, poetry, the impassioned expression which is in the countenance of all sciences. And also, Wordsworth regards poetry as breath and finer spirits of all knowledge. So, through this, we see that how poetry is superior to science. And banking upon making us to interpret how poetry is superior to philosophy, he says that philosophy is the making of reasons which are plumbed or which constitutes some shadows, dreams, finite and infinite aspects of its making. And in the end, they are a false show of knowledge. But we are going to prize poetry at the end. Arnold is going to accord or acclaim poetry high destiny in future, because if we happen to see that poetry has high destiny in future, it must be of high order, excellence, and we must also be accustomed to judge with high standards and strict judgments, because there is no place for charlatanism like politics and other subjects, because this noble task must be kept of inviolate and inviolable in our evolution of poetry. And also, since poetry is the evaluation of life, it must be judged upon the most two important aspects according to Arnold. The first is the poetic truth and the poetic beauty. These are very important to be remembered. Then Arnold says that poetry is going to give us whatever we want, because it has the power of forming, sustaining, and delighting us. And therefore, in our understanding of the best poetry, the joy that we get must be the basis of our estimate of the poet. He says that there are three ways of estimation: to interrogate, or to evaluate, or for understanding poetry in a better way. First one is the historical estimate, second is personal estimate, and the third, which is really is proposed by Arnold, it is the touchstone method. So these are very important in our understanding of poetry. When we apply the first kind of observation, that is the historical method, a poem or a poet come to us historically. We develop a kind of emotion towards them. And we are going to judge such poems or poets by giving importance to the poet and his background than to his poetry, what he says. Or we may use exaggerated language in our criticism, or we may overphrase in our appreciation and fail to arrive at the right poetic judgment. Therefore, Arnold says that historical estimate is going to place before us a ready model, or impose before us a model upon which we happen to gown and this binds the functioning of real criticism. We really go through some unacceptable and conventional appreciation, and in our investigation, we are going to fail. In a sense, Arnold says that we are going to see God in man, or in our understanding, we can say that here we are going to place a unworthy poet with some higher estimation. personal estimate happens to deal with the poets of our contemporary or modern poets. So, through this judgment, we are going to judge the poets based upon our personal likes and dislikes, our ideology, philosophy, culture, religion, color, and such other consideration, which is very dangerous and false according to Arnold. Before going to interpret the best method propagated by Arnold, that is the touchstone method, we will try to understand who is a classic according to Arnold. Classical character of a poet is determined by the reality of classical nature in him. If a poet is false and dubious, we must shift him, and if he is a real classic, we must enjoy, appreciate, and salute. We must not intervene or interfere in our judgments because it is injurious and hinders true approaches. Arnold also says that we must read our classics with open eyes because we must not be blinded with superstitions. We must rate with proper value in our appreciation, and even negative criticism also must be in such a way that it must enable us to have a clearer sense of what poetry is, and in a sense it must enable us to deeper enjoyment of what truly excellent aspects of the poetry is. Then Arnold places before us the real estimate of poetry, which belongs to the class of truly excellent. We must try to use the touchstone method. In this approach, Arnold says that we must keep in one's mind some lines and expressions of the great classical masters like Milton, Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and Keats. Though they though these lines are not going to be similar, or they may be dissimilar, but they have high poetic quality in their matter and substance. Very important. They have high quality in matter and substance. So therefore, touchstone method helps us to have a real and worthy estimate of classical poetry. At this juncture, Arnold happens to comment upon Aristotle's Nemesis, which exists in every classical poet. That is, Nemesis is high truth and high seriousness. High truth and high seriousness. Therefore, these works are regarded as classics due to their high truth and high seriousness. And then Arnold passes on to throw his idea about the French poetry of 12th and 13th century. And we must be aware of the fact that during 12th and 13th century, French poetry had an immense influence upon the European poet. French poetry is not a classical poetry because it does not have seriousness in it, and it deals with romance. And therefore, French poetry can't be regarded as classic, but they are judged by the fallacies of historical estimate. After this, Arnold tries to throw light upon various poets like Chaucer, Dryden, Pope, and others. Arnold says that Chaucer's poetry is superior to the French poet because it has genuine source of joy and strength. It is due to this Chaucer make us to read and is going to be read in future also. Though Chaucer's poetry has high criticism of life and truth of substance, and though Chaucer is regarded as the father of English poetry, Milt Arnold appreciates Chaucer for his lovely charm and diction, like Keats and Shakespeare. Really is going to appreciate Chaucer for his use of diction and lovely charm, like that of Keats and Shakespeare, and also Milton and Spenser. But he fails to be regarded as a classic because his poetry does not have high seriousness in it. After moving on to his assessment of Dryden and Pope, who belongs to the age of restoration and reason, he says that prose was a necessity in this age, and we know that during restoration period, prosaic form was predominantly in use. Therefore, these poets fail to have such greater imagination of life and they fail to have that fineries of poetry because they were ruled by some repression and silencing of poetic language or poetry. He regards Dryden as the glorious founder of prosaic form and also Alexander Pope as the splendid high priest of our age of prose and reason. But they are not classics of poetry, but of prose. Or, in a sense, we can say that they were classics of prose but not poetry. Then he tries to throw light upon Robert Burns, a Scottish poet, in whom we see that personal estimate had its say. In his own assertion, Burns happens to say that he does not have command over the language, that is English. Than of his native, the language of Scott, that is Scottish. Therefore, we fail to see real Burns in his poetry, Arnold says. Though Burns deals with Scottish religion, drink, and manners, though he was a man of vigorous understanding, he failed to have mastery over language, which happens to be one of the most important aspect for the application of these ideas to life, which are governed by the laws of poetic beauty and truth. And in Burns' poetry also, Arnold fails to see this high seriousness. Therefore, he says that Burns' poetry or his voice is not from the depth of soul, and he calls that Burns' poetry were preaching in nature. Therefore, he can't be regarded as a classic. Arnold does not attempt to appreciate the poets of his contemporary like Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Byron because he is scared that he may be moved by personal estimate or personal passion. Therefore, I conclude the essay by saying the words of Arnold that these classics are going to stay forever with supremacy ensured not only for their supremacy but also indeed deliberately the world is conscious in their choice. Students, I want to quote the bibliography that I have referred to. First one is Not an Anthology of Criticism, a collection of critical essays, and English Literature and Irish Politics, published by University of Mackingham. These are the sources that I have relied upon for my understanding of Arnold's the study of poetry. Thank you.